The sun was high, the sky was clear, and the smell of smoky barbecue drifted across the neighborhood. It was the kind of day made for gathering, for laughter, for filling the air with the sizzling sound of burgers and the crackle of charcoal. Friends and family filled the backyard, plates in hand, smiles bright, and music playing just loud enough to set the mood. For me, it wasn't just about grilling food. It was about celebrating a simple joy, bringing people together. The backyard had been decorated with string lights, tables full of sides, and coolers stacked with ice-cold drinks. Children ran through sprinklers while adults swapped stories, and the steady rhythm of summer happiness pulsed through the air. But joy has a way of attracting attention, and in my neighborhood, attention always came with a cost. For every smile and plate piled high with ribs, there was one set of eyes glaring from across the fence, eyes that measured happiness in decibels, and fun in terms of how much it offended her sense of order. That day, those eyes belonged to Karen. She had watched from her window, lips pressed into a hard line, her arms crossed like a judge ready to deliver a sentence. The smoke, the music, the laughter, everything was, in her mind, a crime against her peace. And in her world, peace could only be restored one way, by calling the cops. The sound of sirens would soon break the rhythm of summer. The laughter faltered as the distant wail of sirens grew louder. At first, people thought it was coincidence, a patrol car passing by on its way to something bigger, something unrelated. But the flashing lights slowing down near the curb told a different story. Two police officers stepped out of their car, adjusting their belts and scanning the scene. Neighbors peered from windows, their curiosity lit like moths to a flame. For them, the sight of uniformed officers arriving at a backyard barbecue was better than any Saturday television. Whispers traveled across fences and lawns. Someone had finally called in the law. Karen watched from her porch, arms folded tight, a look of self-satisfaction plastered across her face. She was certain the officers would shut everything down, order the music off, and force guests to scatter. Her victory, she believed, was inevitable. The officers walked through the gate, their presence carrying weight. Conversations dipped, music quieted, and for a moment the atmosphere hung in suspension. Children clutched half-eaten hot dogs, adults held their breaths, and even the grill seemed to sizzle more softly. What Karen didn't realize, however, was that authority doesn't always side with complaint. Sometimes it sides with common sense. Sometimes it sides with community. And sometimes it sides with whoever is holding the plate of food that smells the best. The stage was set, but no one expected what would happen next. The officers were not there to end the party. They were there to change it. The officers scanned the backyard. What they saw wasn't chaos, wasn't disorder, but a gathering of families and friends enjoying a summer day. They noticed children laughing, people eating, and music playing at a reasonable hum. What they didn't see was disturbance. What they didn't hear was disruption. Then came the unmistakable pull of aroma, slow-smoked ribs coated in rich sauce, burgers dripping juice onto the coals, and corn brushed with butter that sizzled on the grill. The smoky sweetness drifted into the air, straight toward the officers, who exchanged a knowing glance. The partygoers waited, tense and uncertain. Would the officers scold, fine, or demand silence? Karen leaned forward on her porch, savoring what she thought would be her victory. But instead of writing tickets, the officers did something no one expected. One of them stepped forward, grabbed a plate from the stack, and began piling it high. The other reached for a cold drink from the cooler, cracking it open with ease. And just like that, the silence broke. The backyard exploded with laughter and cheer as the officers became guests, not enforcers. Karen's jaw dropped, her expression melting from smugness to disbelief. The cops weren't her allies. They were now part of the very thing she tried to destroy. The party had a new life, and Karen's plan had backfired spectacularly. But this was only the beginning of her frustration, and it was about to get worse. As the officers enjoyed their plates, Karen stormed across the lawn, her steps heavy with rage. Her voice carried over the laughter and music, demanding answers, demanding control. But the scene had shifted, and her authority had no place here. She had expected power to back her up, yet now she was the one outnumbered. The neighbors watched, half amused and half annoyed, as Karen waved her arms and pointed toward the grill, toward the speakers, toward everything she despised. Her protests grew sharper, but the officers didn't share her urgency. They had come to evaluate a disturbance, and what they found instead was a harmless celebration. The more Karen raged, the more she isolated herself. The officers continued eating. Neighbors shook their heads, and partygoers ignored her tantrum. What she failed to understand was that community thrives on connection, not control. Her desperate attempts to shut it down only made her appear smaller. A single angry voice drowned out by the hum of joy. For Karen, the sight of officers laughing with guests was unbearable. It wasn't just a defeat, it was humiliation. Her complaints had backfired, leaving her powerless in the very moment she had hoped to shine. But she wasn't finished. She couldn't accept the loss. She retreated, plotting her next move, vowing she wouldn't be ignored. What Karen did next would push the neighborhood into full-blown chaos. Karen's meltdown spread like wildfire across the community. Neighbors whispered, texted, and shared updates faster than the story could unfold. Some defended her right to complain, while most rolled their eyes, tired of her endless need for control. By nightfall, the street was split into camps, those who wanted peace through silence, and those who wanted freedom through celebration. Karen began knocking on doors, rallying anyone who would listen. She painted herself as the victim of lawlessness, insisting the barbecue was an invasion of her rights. Yet the more she spoke, the fewer people cared. Many had long endured her complaints, her demands, and her self-appointed authority. Meanwhile, the party had transformed into something greater, with officers still mingling. The celebration became symbolic, not just about food and music, but about resistance to overbearing control. Laughter grew louder, lights shone brighter, and the backyard felt alive with unity. Karen, however, couldn't stand the sight. She filmed videos, threatened lawsuits, and promised to escalate. But her credibility was already unraveling. People began seeing her not as a protector of order, but as the very source of chaos. The neighborhood was no longer divided between noise and quiet. It was divided between those who wanted to live freely and those who wanted to control. And soon, the entire street would witness the final clash between joy and bitterness. As night fell deeper, the backyard glowed with string lights, the sound of music floating into the warm air. The officers eventually left, their job long finished but their plates empty and spirits full. They left behind laughter, reassurance, and the undeniable proof that Karen had been wrong. The party continued into the night, fueled not by defiance, but by gratitude. Gratitude for neighbors who came together, gratitude for a shared victory against needless conflict, and gratitude for the realization that community thrives when people lift each other up, not tear each other down. Karen retreated to her porch, defeated. The shadows swallowed her as the music played on, her complaints nothing more than background noise. For once, she wasn't in control. For once, she had to live with the fact that joy had triumphed over her bitterness. By the next morning, the story had spread beyond the neighborhood. People retold it with laughter, shaking their heads at the absurdity. The tale of a backyard barbecue that drew police, only for the officers to join in, became legend. A reminder that sometimes, the best revenge is living happily, no matter who tries to stop you. Karen's name became a warning, her actions a lesson, her defeat a victory shared by all. And so, the backyard barbecue ended not as a disturbance, but as a celebration of freedom, community, and resilience. Because when joy and unity face off against bitterness and control, joy always wins.